Not long ago, I had a conversation with a paramedic named Joanna Sokol, who was in the middle of almost about ready to publish a book about her experience as 15 years as a paramedic. I thought this would be great stuff. It is. It's a great book. It's called A Real Emergency: Stories from the Ambulance. Joanna was a paramedic in Reno and then in San Francisco, and the stories that she has to tell about life of a paramedic, particularly life of a paramedic during times of fentanyl and methamphetamine, seemed particularly appropriate to this Dreamland podcast. So I wanted y'all to hear what she had to say. Anyway, this is my conversation with Joanna Sokol. First, the big question everyone probably wants to know is, how do you learn to drive when you are a paramedic? Do you just they just let you say, just drive as fast as you can and everyone will get the hell out of your way? Or is there a class in how to drive as a paramedic, that kind of thing? I mean, it seems to be a major part of your job.
You're not that far off.
Okay, good.
We take like 1 4-hour class. You get your
One?
ambulance. Yeah.
That's it? Oh, man.
Your
Okay.
ambulance license is a written test that you do at the DMV. There's a set of rules that you learn about, school zones and stuff. And then you take a class, your first ambulance job, called EVOC, and they basically go set up a bunch of cones. They set up a cone course, and everyone takes turns zooming around the ambulances and wailing on the horns, and then that's it. You go to work. And
Literally, that's all there is to it?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a lot of trial and error. And one of the things, when we have the sirens on, we don't actually go that fast. We only will go like 10 or 15 over the speed limit. Usually it depends if we're in a residential zone. We don't usually actually go that fast. We really just use them for getting through intersections. And one ways and going where you're turning left, where you're not allowed to turn left. There's actually a family rule in my house that I'm not allowed to give directions in San Francisco.
Okay.
Because I got in trouble one too many times for saying, "Oh, you just got to oppose for a block up here. It's fine." And my parents were like, "We can't oppose. We don't have sirens."
Just impose. Is that the verb?
Yeah, if you're gonna go the wrong way up a one way, or if you're gonna go up the wrong side of up the wrong side of a street, oppose.
Oppose.
We're just gonna oppose traffic real quick.
Why'd you want to be a paramedic, EMT?
Well, I loved science growing up. I loved science and medicine. I thought that I would do something in the medical field. And I went off to kind of a fancy science program at a fancy university. And I really liked the material, but I couldn't sit still. I just could not sit in a library for 10 or 12 hours a day. Well, I knew there was like a whole big wide world out there full of sights and sounds and colors and music and mountains. I cut class a lot to go snowboarding. I had a really hard time focusing. And I ended up dropping in and out of school, drinking too much, driving around the country. And the second time that I dropped out, I took an EMT class at a local community college. When I got into it, I really didn't know what I was getting into. I was like, it's medicine and emergencies and you drive fast, pew, 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 that should be cool. And so I took the class and I loved it. The teachers were it was so immediate. There was no BS. There was no time for like, oh, you have to memorize all this stuff you're never going to use. The teachers would say, you're only going to learn what we have time for. You're going to go out in the field. You're going to get to work. And as an EMT, the class only about a semester long. And then you're out in the field. You're touching patients after one semester of class.
And that appealed to you, that kind of immediacy?
Yes. I love that. I use the word immediacy a lot. I love the immediacy of the work. I love that you're out in the field, you're talking to people, you're going into their houses, you're walking up like a back alleyway with a flashlight looking for someone. And then you're literally using your hands and feet to help them. You're down on your knees, like on the bathroom floor in the alleyway in the back of a kitchen. And we don't always know what we're supposed to do, but we always get in there and try like right away. And that part of it really appealed to me. That part's really fun.
I was a crime reporter in Stockton, California. And I remember my first day at work, a woman walked in front of a train going fast, and she was ripped in two, and there was no blood. And that was, I learned that day, was because the train hit you with such unimaginable force that it cauterizes your body. So your body becomes like a sealed balloon.
That's really
so I wanted to ask you, what was your first memorable day on the job as a EMT or paramedic?
And one of my first jobs is I did standbys for music festivals and raves. I'd been working for probably at least 6 months by that time. I'd seen a lot of little stuff, I was pretty comfortable talking to people, and we were working a really big, large scale rave, big name DJ. There was probably like 16 or 20,000 people there, and something went wrong. We never figured out exactly what, but there was some combination of bad drugs going around. The place was filled way past capacity. It was really hot. And kids started basically boiling to death and having seizures. And so what started out as this fun, goofy rave where we were expecting to deal with, a bunch of 17-year-olds that drank too much, all of a sudden we had multiple critical calls going on at the same time. People were seizing. They had these really high fevers of like 107, 108. We were transporting them left and right. And the patient that I was working on, I was looking down at, and I couldn't really tell if she was seizing or not. She was just kind of flailing her arms and like moving around really weirdly. Later on, I learned that that's not what a seizure looks like. But at the time, I didn't know because I'd never even seen one before. And she had fallen, so there was a wound. And I'm trying to get an ambulance, but I can't break through on the radio because the radio is really busy all of a sudden. And then we finally do get her transported. And I thought I was going to get to kind of like stop and recover a little bit and sort of debrief and be like, whoa, holy crap, that was such a big deal. And it turned out that there was a bunch more patients waiting. And so I just had to get back into it. And that's something that kept happening over and over again in the career is you don't always get time to stop when you want to,
One of the things I like about your book is that it's got some obscure but important historical characters in the history of ambulances and emergency medical care. So real briefly, just give me your best description of some of these people. Who was Claude Beck?
Claude Beck helped work on the invention of CPR and defibrillation.
Who was Peter Safar?
Peter Safar's fun. He's a really interesting story. He was born in Europe right before the war. And he actually was supposed to get conscripted into the Nazi army, but he didn't want to go. He saw how messed up everything was. And he had some connection to medicine before, which I'm forgetting right now. He had worked in a clinic growing up or something. And he knew he was super, super allergic to one particular type of cream. And he covered his whole body in that cream so that he could induce a really severe allergic reaction and get out of going to the army. And he almost died. He ended up in the hospital when they came looking for him to try to recruit him to be a Nazi, but he was in the hospital. And so he got out of it. He ends up coming to the United States and he gets sort of obsessed, as many doctors get like one thing that they're really into, with trying to figure out how to resuscitate people. And so you were starting to allude to this, but one thing I knew this before I started researching the book, but I didn't really think about it, is that the whole process of resuscitation, right? Doing CPR, defibrillating somebody, ka-chung, bringing them back from the dead, right? Hearts stop, and we can actually get them back some of the time. That didn't really get invented until like the 60s,
That's the amazing thing. I was surprised that it's so recent.
Yeah, it's really not that long ago.
Yeah.
And so Safar came over to the US. He immigrated over here from Europe, and he was completely obsessive about it. And he more or less, they call him the father of CPR. He took a bunch of research that a bunch of other doctors had done about how to do chest compressions, how to do rescue breathing, how to defibrillate. And he's the one that really actually put it all together into one methodology to bring people back from cardiac arrest.
One of the things that this book conjured up to me was a lecture that I had in college and a literature class about literature of the Renaissance. And the teacher, the professor, gave one entire full class lecture on shit in the Renaissance, how everybody was surrounded by it. There's no escaping it, and we don't have any conception of what that was like. The smell and the health hazard, of course, was just massive, But I obviously never forgot that thing. Reading your book, what strikes me is that we are so separate from excrement, except...
I would love to sit in on that lecture.
Yeah, no, yeah. Stephen Greenblatt, he's now at Harvard. He was at Berkeley when I was there. very, very well-known Shakespearean scholar and all that. Anyway, what I was interested in was that now it seems like some of the few people who are constantly
Yeah.
connected to excrement, feces, and all that are, well, people in the ER, but certainly paramedics. Can
Yeah.
you give us a little bit of idea? Was that something you were expecting?
My mom read an early draft of the book and she was like, Joe, no one's going to read your book if it's 300 pages of cynicism and diarrhea.
Well,
And I was like, that's what my job is, mom. We deal, and she actually made me, it's funny, she made me edit out some of the shit.
okay.
A good part of it. There is less, I literally had to edit it out.
Wow.
Um, there was one part where she was like, you can't have this guy metaphorically taking a shit and literally taking a shit at the same time. Um, and yeah, there's so much of it. And a lot of our patients are homeless,
Yeah,
and homeless people don't have anywhere to go to the bathroom. There's
yeah,
very few public bathrooms in most cities, and it's true in San Francisco as well.
of course.
And like you pointed out, most of us get to do it in the toilet and flush it away. But
Yeah.
for folks who are sick, who are disabled, who are out on the street, who are stuck on the floor because they fell and they can't get up on their own, um, who are really, really ill and don't have control of their bowels anymore, it's all over the place. Um,
I guess
and
I
I
wonder
think
how
I
you
would
did
say
not, how this did not drain all energy that you had for the job.
nurses and medics spend more time around human feces. A big part of a nurse's job actually is cleaning people up, because if you don't have your butt clean, you're going to get really sick, get infections. Um, did it throw me off the work? No, the poop didn't throw me off the work. I was never offended by the poop. There were other things that burned me out over time for sure.
Okay,
Um,
well, maybe we'll get to some of those.
yeah.
One of the other things I found fascinating that you mentioned in the book is that it's so rare now that you encounter infectious diseases, and I guess this was thrown into relief counterpoint when you during COVID, of course. Now it was an
Yeah.
infectious disease, but really that's not mostly what you all deal with. It's mostly chronic conditions. Sounds like to me things created by diabetes and addiction and obesity and variety of think that why do you think that is?
Antibiotics work really well, you know.
Yeah.
I think that we don't I think sometimes personally, because I like to read medical history for fun, I think that the invention of antibiotics was one of those, like, it was one of those turning points in human history that's on par with like electricity or the agricultural revolution. You know, it completely changed the equation for like the way that humans interact with disease. And
Or the
um,
flush toilet
yeah, exactly.
sewage
So we're
system.
actually really good at fighting most infectious diseases these days. You know, it's pretty rare, at least in the US, that you're going to get cholera outbreaks or diphtheria outbreaks or yellow fever, you know, because we've actually
Right.
gotten really good. Um, and you know, vaccines are their own exciting conversation.
Right.
But yeah, between antibiotics, vaccines, antivirals, we're actually really good at fighting most of those diseases. So we do run on them sometimes as medics. But as for why most of the problems seem to be chronic diseases and addiction and mental illness, that sort of gets at like one of the core um, principles of 911 that is one of the
Okay.
big ongoing themes in my book, which is that anyone can call 911 for any
Right.
reason. When you
Right.
call us, we don't take your credit card information first. We don't ask you how serious your disease is first. You don't have to pass a test or like qualify. We just send someone. In most of America, for most people, if you have a doc at all, it's like, okay, we can fit you in like next October, you know? And so people have problems they don't know how to deal with. They don't know who else to call. They call us. We're the free doctor.
Right.
And so a massive amount of our call volume ends up being the elderly, the homeless, mental illness. We become a social safety net for basically everyone in the US that doesn't have anyone else to call. And that's for better or for worse. It's like one of the underlying principles of 911. We were sort of invented to open airways and stop bleeding. And what we end up doing is just taking care of any problem that anyone has that they don't have someone else to call. It's really intense. It's really frustrating. It's really exhausting. It means that 95% of our calls are not like real emergencies. They're people with just kind of minor medical complaints that don't have a good financial or social situation. But I think that there's honor in it. And there is something about it that's really cool to me. The fact that I'm going to go help someone that no one else is going to help,
Yes.
this guy is so hard to help. He's so mean. He's so difficult to deal with that nobody else in his whole life is going to help him. And he's going to call us and we're going to show up every single time. We're going to try to help him out.
No, it's
I think,
quite a noble thing.
yeah, I think it's noble. It's challenging, but I think it's cool. I still think it's a cool job that someone should
And
do.
so, is this why there is you were writing in the book? You said you dream of a time when people call only for a real emergency, which is of course what you titled your great book here. Why do you hope that? Why do you
That
hope that
people
it?
would only call for real emergencies.
Yeah,
I personally don't. I think a lot of us do, and we start off in that way. And then over time, you have to either accept or not accept what the ambulance actually is. I fantasize about it sometimes, when I'm having a really exhausting day and I'm dealing with my 17th patient in a row who's like high on meth, screaming at me, covered in poop, and doesn't actually want my help, or my 17th patient in a row who's like, oh, I sprained my toe and I didn't know what else to do. Sometimes I kind of fantasize about it. I'm like, man, wouldn't it be cool if we were just like really helping the most like romantic, exciting cases? When I stop and think about it, I don't know if that's actually what I want because I just don't think it's realistic, And I
yeah.
think that those folks are still going to need help, whether we're helping them or not.
Right.
Um,
One of the things that you wrote that I thought was very interesting, and I'm paraphrasing here, that you were saying that you need to develop a larger and larger arsenal for how to deal with chaos, which means
yeah,
I guess improvisation constantly, and it seems like you paramedics and emergency medical service types are the chaos limiters or something like that. I was wondering if you just explain to me what you meant by that and why you thought that was important to do, to always be finding ways of confining of limiting chaos, I guess.
yeah. You're quoting Jamie. So one of the funnest parts for the book for me is it's not just my voice. I actually went out and interviewed some other EMTs and paramedics, and I got their perspective, and I have them like telling testimonials in their own voice, and that's actually probably the part of the book that I'm proudest of. So Jamie is the one, she's talking about when she was a young EMT and she's trying to figure out how to do the job, and this situation gets really overwhelming, and she says you have to develop more and more tools in your arsenal for how to deal with chaos. Um, and I think it is so important because not all of our calls in school, we learn a pretty limited skill set, right? We learn some basic anatomy and physiology. We focus on cardiology and strokes and traumas, learn how to stop bleeding, how to recognize a stroke, how to like treat certain heart rhythms. We come out of medical school with maybe 30 or 40 medications we can give.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of focus on mental health. There's not a lot of focus on like verbal de-escalation, on how to deal with domestic issues and social issues. And then you get out into the field and it's your first day and you're like, yeah, I'm ready to open an airway. I'm ready to like see a heart attack and defibrillate and transport. And your first call you ever run is like a guy at a liquor store who wants this homeless dude that's been passed out in front to leave. And so he wakes him up and starts yelling at him. And then the homeless guy wakes up and starts yelling at the liquor store guy. And then someone's brother shows up. And then the homeless guy's disabled, so he can't move on his own. And then the brother's yelling at him. And then someone else pooped their pants. And you just walk into it as this brand new EMT. And you're like, I got my defibrillator and my tourniquet. And you're like, what the heck are we doing here?
Yeah.
And so most of that training, like Jamie talks about how to deal with chaos, it's you really learn it on the job. It's
Yeah.
really trial and error. A lot of it is just kind of like wisdom passed down from older medics, almost like an oral history,
But I think that's what struck me in reading your book is it's almost like a folk craft.
Yeah,
There's a science to it, of course,
that's a great way
and
to
there's
put it.
technology, but there's also like this folk craft element to being on an ambulance. Like
Yes,
you have this stuff
100%.
passed down wisdom from the elders in a
Yeah.
sense.
No, absolutely. I think 90% of 95% of what I learned exactly was just wisdom from the elders. You work with somebody more experienced than you, and they teach you how to do stuff. They teach you how to talk someone down as having a panic attack. They teach you how to recognize the difference between two different conditions that present similarly. The school-based education we get is really, really basic. Um, EMT school is about a semester, and medic school is about like a year and a half, 2 years, depending where you do it. And
Right.
it's really focused on like this sort of strict medicine side of things. And then you get out in the field. Yeah. And exactly. I think of folk craft, that's actually a really good way to put it.
I wonder
Because it
what's the most
is.
important thing. I know you probably have learned a ton, but what is the most important thing you learned passed down from your elder fellow EMT and paramedics?
Um, just how to talk to people. I know that's really vague, but like tone of voice. So I watch somebody walk into a scene, um, and kind of start yelling and say the way they do on TV, you get the cart, you do this, you did that. Or you watch somebody coming on the scene who has more experience than them and knows what they're doing. And they say, hey man, how's it going today? How you feeling? Oh, your chest is hurting. All right, let me take a look at that. And you can really bring down the level of chaos in a scene just by regulating your own tone of voice and your own body
I
language.
was wondering, you arrive in San Francisco in 2013, is it?
I get to SF in 2016.
Fentanyl arrives about 2 years later, three, maybe
Yeah.
three.
Yep.
Just give me an idea what your recollections were of that transitional period there.
It really wasn't until I'd been in the city for a couple years that fentanyl hit. I want to say it was more like 2018, maybe. Um, so we would run heroin overdoses. We'd give him some Narcan. We'd bring him back most of the time. So we started hearing about fentanyl, this like really extra dangerous, scary drug that they're lacing into the heroin. And things are always getting laced with things, in scary stories. And so we are kind of like, all right, yeah, man, whatever. Um, and I remember a guy that we transported who lived at one of the hotels in the city, one of the weekly hotels. You pay a weekly or a monthly rate. They're pretty unregulated. They're very rough. Um, lot of roaches and bad plumbing. A lot of the time you don't have your own bathroom. There's bathrooms down the hall. And he was kind of the doctor on the floor. He would carry Narcan with him and he would bring people back. And I remember him saying, I used to do it like once or twice a year, I think. And he suddenly had been doing dozens. And then about a month later, it hit. We
Wow.
suddenly were giving people Narcan once or twice a day, where before that it had been like, I don't know, every couple months. And in the city, especially, there's a very lively um, homeless sort of like open air. There's a lot of people that are outside doing drugs in the street. And that's always been common for the city. One of the reasons San Francisco gets so much shit from other cities is that our really druggy homeless area is right next to our downtown and our tourist area.
Yeah.
There's other cities that have bad neighborhoods, but they're much more separated. They're farther apart. Whereas in the
No.
city, you get off the airplane, you get a fancy hotel, and you walk out right into it. And I remember Civic Center Plaza just covered in people. I mean, just hundreds of people out. And they were just using fentanyl openly in the streets and they were dropping like flies. We would suddenly be like, you'd be working one overdose and somebody 50 feet away would yell and you'd have to go run over and like Narcan that guy. And then the first guy would drop again. I mean, it was like multiple overdoses per call. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And so it was so dramatic. And that's why when I read books like yours that talk about it, we knew when fentanyl got to San Francisco.
First of all, when do you first time you saw the fentanyl fold? People like bent over, almost like with their chins touching their shoes.
I know we started to see it more and more, and we were like, "What the?" And then all of a sudden, it just became completely normal. And
Can you also give me an idea of what people on meth? You were writing about this in the book. People on meth were like early on in your career when you first encountered people on meth.
yeah.
What were they like, and how did that then change as well?
Yeah. So I would love to talk about meth. I think that I actually have a lot of feelings about this because I think that the opiate and the fentanyl crisis gets so much media attention and so much medical attention. There's so many rehab facilities, there's so much media, there's so many books about opiates, and we have Suboxone and buprenorphine and all this attention. And meth, your book aside, a lot of the time people just kind of pretend it's not happening. And it's such a big issue for us on the streets. It's so huge and it's so real and it's such a big part of our day. And I know we're supposed to talk about my book and not yours, but that's one of the reason that the least of like every medic I know has just been passing around the least of us because it's one of the only places we've seen real coverage of like what's actually going on with the meth. And I remember seeing the change happen. I didn't know I was seeing it at the time.
Hmm.
Um, I actually, the first couple of years that I was a medic, we would have people who were high on meth and they would talk really fast. They'd be like up at 2 a.m, taking about a bicycle and putting it back together. We'd help them out. Their heart rates would be going really fast, but a lot of the time you could still interact with them. You could still converse. You could still have a meaningful conversation. Um, and there's this moment that I was thinking I would tell you about. One of the first really, really psycho calls I ran with meth was I was first in Reno, and I was a very young medic, and I got called on this guy. It's in a dirty motel room. The lights don't work, so it's like flickering and flashlights, super dramatic. There's broken glass and blood all over the floor. It's this huge guy. He's fighting. There's 6 or 8 cops trying to hold him down. And he's fighting them all off, and he's covered in sweat. He's completely incoherent, super combative, super deranged. And he'd managed to cut his arm most of the way off with a broken bottle. And so there's blood everywhere. So we're trying to put a tourniquet on. When I showed up, a cop was actually he'd made like a bootleg tourniquet out of a bandana or something in a taser. He's using the taser to cinch the tourniquet down. And so we're trying to get a tourniquet on this guy and fight him and sedate him all at the same time. And I remember afterwards talking about like, oh man, something, bath salts, PCP, like what the heck was that? And then we started running more and more crazy calls that were like that. And then fast forward 10 years, and I'm reading your stuff, and you talk about how PC or P2P meth really first hit in 2013.
Yeah.
And I physically recoiled. I remembered that call, and I was like, like that was 2013. That's literally what year it was that we started seeing that stuff.
Right.
And those calls happened occasionally before that. Like people did, you heard about people PCPing out and those like rage calls. But I remember when I read that passage in your book and when I first saw 2013, like I remember seeing the numbers. It was such a like jolt for me of actually seeing the history of how much meth changed and how much that changed our job. And now years later, that call doesn't even stand out to me anymore because that's like the cutting his arm off and the tourniquet taser is pretty dramatic. Like that will always stand out. But the idea of 6 or 8 of us having to fight a guy and sit on him while he's like profusely sweating and super violent and super incoherent, that's like a normal day for us.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. I agree with you that fentanyl does get the headlines, and I guess that rightfully so. People die of it
Yeah.
routinely, but I think frequently in many towns, it's really meth that creates the problems. First of all,
Yeah.
in families, homelessness, you cannot live with someone who's on meth. You can live with someone who's addicted to
Mhm.
opioids, like
Yeah.
pain pills and all that, but and then also it provides it's such a drain on the social services, on law enforcement, on the hospitals. I mean, it's just unbelievable amounts of budget devoted to dealing with people who are out of their minds, except for that they're not like organically schizophrenic.
Yeah.
It's
I worked
meth-induced
with
psychosis.
a social worker actually at one point, and I asked her point blank because we were talking about schizophrenia versus meth psychosis, yada yada. And I asked her point blank, I was like, okay, she had some advanced degree. She had like a master's or PhD in psychology. And I was like, um, is there any functional difference between long-term meth use and really, really advanced florid schizophrenia? And she
Right.
just point blank said, no, it's the same. Like once you use enough meth, you start to have that level of disorientation and derangement and hallucination.
Yeah.
I mean, it just eats your brain. And as you said, fentanyl kills a lot of people. It kills, and there's so much tragedy because people die, especially young people, young, otherwise healthy people are just dying in the streets. And that is really tragic. Um, but meth doesn't kill you right away. It melts your brain. And then you are alive running around the streets with a melted brain that makes you completely incapable of like normal human interaction, of maintaining your own safety or the safety and shelter of the people around you. And then you're just still alive for like really long. And as a society, we have to try to figure out how to be compassionate to you and how to be compassionate to the people around you and how to provide like a safe and functional environment for everyone to coexist, while you've got somebody who's at a degree of mental illness. And I think when a lot of like non-medical, non-crime reporter types hear the phrase mental illness, they tend to think of their own experience of mental illness. Oh, I have anxiety, I have panic attacks,
Right.
I have an aunt who like goes off the rails and drinks too much sometimes. They're not thinking of the guy who is screaming and sweating in gibberish and cut his own arm most of the way off with a broken bottle. Like that's what I think about when I use the phrase mental illness.
But why did you want to write a book and then go ahead and do it? That's the follow through. That's the remarkable thing, and one that I'm very impressed by. So
a lot of medics, we gather more and more stories as we go on. And the longer in your career you get, it starts to get heavier. You have to carry around all these really intense experiences everywhere you go. And for me, the only way that I could lighten the load was by writing them down. I've always been somebody who like takes notes and keeps journals, even since I was a young kid. When I go through something intense, or when I'm like trying to figure something out, I just write it down. That's always been how my brain works. And so I had this backpack full of stories. I had hundreds of pages of notes, literally. I mean, I have like dozens of journals just piled up. That was all just me sort of like emptying my backpack over and over. There's sort of an image in the movies and on TV of what you think paramedics are like and what you think this work is like. And it's deeply inaccurate. And I think it does a real disservice to the people that actually do the work. We would stand around having these conversations that were like, man, if people knew what this was really like. And there was a part of me that really just wanted to like rip the Band-Aid off, like just Upton Sinclair it, just like, this is what our job actually is. And I think all of you people should be forced to know about it. I don't want to have to carry this around by myself. I think everyone should have to think about this. I actually think COVID had a lot to do with it because there was so much misinformation. I was hearing so many people talk about the healthcare industry and that just had no idea what they were talking about. Yeah. Between COVID and then the Black Lives Matter movement and then on all the meth and all the opiate, I just kept seeing headlines and I kept seeing talking headlines. And this isn't an attack on one particular political group because all of them were doing it. I kept seeing headlines of people talking about the healthcare industry that just had no clue. And I would be screaming at the paper and I was like, you have no idea what our job is actually like and what we do all day for a living. And so I started, I think, to build more and more momentum to push me over the edge to being like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to write in as honest a way as I can to try to tell people what this job actually is.
Well, good for you. This is a real emergency. It's like the Upton Sinclair of the version of the emergency medical world. Let me read one last thing because I really loved it. And it's toward the end of the book. And you write, I don't own any EMS coffee mugs. I don't go to the gym in my station shirt. I tell myself again and again that although my time on the ambulance will one day end, I can have an important second career as a physician assistant or teacher or writer, and I won't spend the rest of my life defined as someone who, quote, used to be a paramedic, unquote. But I must admit that I don't really believe I will ever do anything else quite as exciting as 911. That's a great way. You don't end the book that way, but I love that passage. It kind of talks about all the ambivalence, but also the immense love and energy that you get from the profession. Yeah. It's a wonderful thing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I loved it. I hated it. It was kind of my whole life for a long time. So.
Well, I'm glad you wrote this book. The book's The Real Emergency: Stories from the Ambulance by Joanna Sokol. Joanna, thank you so much for being here, and good luck with the book. I know it's going to do really, really well. Something we all should be reading. I had the same feeling you did. Like, man, I should have known some of this stuff, and I really should have, and I think we all should. So, thank you very much for writing it.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate getting to come on and talk to you. It's been really fun.
Okay, then. That was amazing. That was a conversation with Joanna Sokol, paramedic, author of A Real Emergency: Stories from the Ambulance. Wonderful chat. So loving talking with people like Joanna who shed such light on their little corners of the world. Hope you liked it as well. If so, share it up. Subscribe to my Dreamland newsletter and to my YouTube channel, True Tales Video. And I'll see you on the next one.